I'm going to move on now to Cllr Kate Nicholl. And Kate has been doing some really innovative and impressive work in her constituency, particularly looking at social exclusion and deprivation. And so I want to hand over to Kate, who's going to talk a little bit about those inequalities and what we can do as a party to try to intervene much earlier and support people. So Kate, if you would like to come through, thanks.
Thanks so much, Naomi. Good afternoon, conference. Last year, I was sitting in my kitchen and I was feeding my 1-year-old son, who you can maybe hear in the background, his breakfast. And I always make too much of this and he never finishes it. And I heard on the radio Dr. Julianne Maney talking about the child poverty that she's been witnessing in hospitals. She talked about a sick toddler who had saved toast in their nappy just to have something to eat later on, and small children devouring 3 bowls of cereal because they didn't know when they would get their next meal. And the fact that not all children in our city have the same start to life as my son is so brutally unfair. It's so heartbreaking, but it's also completely avoidable. So I asked myself, how are we allowing this to happen? And I reached out to people who are working on tackling poverty to better understand what more it is we should be doing. For me, this is a personal issue, and it's not just because I'm a mother or because, like every other Alliance representative, I work with people who are struggling to make ends meet, but because I have experienced poverty and the shame and the fear that comes with that. When I was 13, my mum and I arrived in Belfast, and my mum had £50 to her name. And to this day, she still credits the charity Gingerbread, who provided the tailored support we needed for saving us. I credit my mum. Conference, the more I speak to constituents living in poverty and organisations supporting them, the more I realise that what people actually need is more money, more targeted support, and a long-term plan from government to tackle systemic injustice, not more food parcels. And I've been struck by the following points. And the first one is around stigma. Our welfare system is punitive. People are not getting enough, and some who need and are entitled to help are not claiming anything because they're embarrassed to. People who are working but in poverty are struggling. Families now in poverty as a result of COVID-19 are struggling. For some, if you're on furlough, receiving 80% of your salary is completely fine, but for others, it's simply not enough to make ends meet, and they are struggling. We need to talk about the reality of poverty more, and we urgently need a culture shift. The second point is on the issue of access. So, for example, digital poverty has really come into the fore. We live in the online world more and more, as we're experiencing today, and quite frankly, the internet should be free to everyone. Families don't need one device per household. They need devices for all their children. They need money for electricity, money for data. The access to support where community infrastructure doesn't exist is also a massive issue, and this is something I've been working really hard on to improve in South Belfast because people are falling through the gaps. The third point I want to make is that poverty is not just about access to food. When Sinn Féin proposed directing council funding into food packages, it was Alliance that amended this to ensure targeted need, because if your washing machine has broken and your kids can't go to school in clean clothes, a food parcel is not going to help you. If you live in an unfurnished house, you need a bed, not a one-off food package. If you need a meal, you most likely need this regularly, not a one-off. So while the partnerships between local government and the voluntary and community sector has been so inspiring, we need to remember it's personalized support that makes a tangible difference. And the final point I want to make is on the issue of dignity. People who give charity are in a position of power over those who receive it. So there's no choice, there's no agency, you're made to feel thankful. You shouldn't be thankful, you should have a government that is supporting for you. And I think that's why Alliance's advocacy for the introduction of universal basic income is so vitally important. Since I heard Dr. Maney's interview, I've been working on what we can do from a council and community planning perspective. The Alliance Belfast Council team has been pushing to ensure that funding is allocated on a thematic basis, not just along community divides. And we've also secured commitment to work with the Department for Communities to secure additional funding, but also to identify regional policy with local outcomes through a comprehensive and resourced anti-poverty strategy, which we believe is absolutely essential in order to truly address the issue of poverty in our society. And I know Kelly Armstrong has been doing a huge amount of work on this. Poverty is an entrenched and it's a complex issue. And whilst short-term action is necessary, this needs to be targeted. But we also need to be looking at the long-term response, because only directing funding at the impact does not address the cause. Nelson Mandela said, overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity. It's an act of justice.